When you look at some of the most wealthiest men in life today, topping the charts and coming in at tech billionaires such as Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates, but before them was one of the wealthiest businessmen to have ever lived, who died almost a century ago. In this video, we're going to be looking at the business empire so vast that even after 100 years of technological progress, no man has managed to overtake its founder. This is the history of Standard Oil and its most infamous person to have ever worked for them, John Rockefeller. Welcome back to the video, guys. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I want to go ahead and get right into today's video because it's a really cool story about how John Rockefeller literally built this amazing empire. The origins of the greatest oil monopoly are actually pretty humble. It all started back in 1839 with the birth of John Rockefeller in upstate New York. As a child, he would spend weeks away from home and in fact would have several children with another woman who he decided to bring back home to be his wife so they could all live together. In this very confusing household, John would grow up learning how to hustle people for the best deal possible and how to get the most out of every penny he got. His family would rarely stay in one place for too long, and John would live in his nomadic lifestyle ever since he was 3 years old. To help his mother, John would earn any type of money he could, so he would do chores and also raise turkeys for his parents. Now, the early oil hustle was really fascinating from John's standpoint. John started trading hay, grain, and various meats. In his first year, he recorded sales of $500,000, of which he only got a small fraction of as commissions, but it was still a huge success. This is very, very infamous because he was actually, back then in the oil days, it wasn't as popular as it is today. So he was actually kind of breaking even with a lot of his investments. Gasoline cars haven't been invented yet, but oil could still be processed into kerosene, which people would then use in lamps. Instead, he'd let others go through the hassle of finding the oil, and he would just buy it off them. John had to wait around until 1863 for the government to build a rail line connecting the Pennsylvania oil fields to Cleveland, but then when that line was built, John was ready for it with a long line of partners and banks ready to back him up. He also assembled a team of seasoned chemists and engineers who not only optimized a refining process, but also discovered various uses for the byproducts of redefining petroleum. This was a very, very smart investment on his part. Now, refining the business, you see the early refineries in Cleveland could only operate at about a 60% efficiency, and John not only increased the efficiency and percentage, but he also started selling all the byproducts like paraffin wax, tar, and naphtha. Within 2 years, the Rockefeller refinery was worth over $70,000 and was among the largest in Cleveland. But this was just the beginning of the humble beginnings. In 1865, there were 26 contempting refineries, but within 5 years, John had acquired all but 4 of them. This was a very marginalized number. By this point, his business was getting too big to handle as a partnership, and the partnership he acquired in 1970 ended up incorporating him as the Standard Oil of Ohio. This was very big in terms of day. At this point, John was so powerful that he could invite the owners of the big rail companies and personally negotiate rebates for using their trains, but his practice of negotiating backfired on him, actually got the business world riled up. At the time, and still kind of today, most industrial goods were transported by rail. Many big industrialists got worried that John's abuse of transportation rebates could result in a similar monopolization in their industries. Over the next decade, businessmen, politicians, and the media would attack Standard Oil with increasing ferocity. Legislators in Ohio began drafting antitrust regulations to bring down the Rockefeller industries, but he was always one step ahead of them, it seemed. In 1882, he incorporated in New Jersey, this time creating the Standard Oil Trust, which in turn held stakes in over 40 local companies. What this means is Rockefeller, like I said, was one step ahead of everyone and was able to go ahead and invest in stocks. When he held stakes in all of the 40 local companies, it just meant that he built a long-lasting trust line with them, and that anything that he helped them do, they would actually return the favor. So if the government or politicians were going ahead and trying to bring him down, these 40 local companies would go ahead and back him up, making it almost impossible to bring him down. It's always good to build connections, and Rockefeller knew this from an early age. In the final 20 years of his company's existence, it had paid over $500 million in dividends. By some estimates, the true worth of the Standard Oil at its peak was $1 trillion, so the breakup didn't really come as a surprise to most people. Of course, John Rockefeller kept his stake in those companies until his death. In fact, it turns out that the breakup was one of the most profitable events in his life. You see, over time, many of those companies merged back with one another. Today, most of the Standard remnants are part of either ExxonMobil, Chevron, or BP, which have become incredibly large companies in their own right. Rockefeller's ownership of these successor companies made him the richest businessman to have ever lived, with an estimated net worth of $400 billion. Even today, no one has beaten Rockefeller in the leaderboard. Not even Jeff Bezos himself seems likely he'll ever achieve that in his lifetime. However, he will cut it close, as he is worth $110 billion. I think this kind of sums up how he built this industry into a multi-trillion-dollar empire, and it kind of defined and was on the borderline of a monopoly and how it wasn't. But still, I think this type of monopoly, or I guess if you want to call it that, definitely needs to be looked at for years and years to come. I hope you guys enjoyed that story about how John Rockefeller built a $1 trillion oil company and pretty much built it from the ground up, starting at getting it around $70,000 worth of net worth to achieving the first ever and probably only $1 trillion industry. What part of his success story did you guys like the most? Let me know down below in the comments. But that's it for today's video, guys. I'm signing off, and as always, I'll see you guys later.